So I'm not even positive I'm going to be able to do this. I think every talk I've given over the last 3 months, John has been with me. So I might not even be capable on my own. We'll see. But we're going to talk about what to me is one of the most exciting technologies to come out in probably the last 5 years. Now, I still would say Angular is one of my most exciting of all. But how many happen to have an issue where you maybe have a team that works on Windows or Linux or Mac, and some of your services are over on this server and some are over here, but sometimes you're VPNing in, and it's really hard to get the entire environment set up on your machine exactly like production, or staging for that matter. I'm sure nobody has this problem, right? How many have ever had the problem called, "It works on my machine"? Yes, I'm pretty good at that one, and I love to say that. So to jump on in here, we're going to talk about the role that Docker can play. And I'm not going to go, super deep dive into Docker, because there's a lot we could cover here. But I do want to kind of make it dangerous so that you can cause smoke and fire back at work and be dangerous that way. But I'll teach you enough to be dangerous here and show you why, even as a front-end developer, it's very possible you might find Docker useful. Now, if you came to me and said, Dan, I'm only doing Node or ASP.NET Core or something like that, or maybe Java locally, I don't even have to hit a database, we're faking the data maybe, and I just have Angular, then in that case I'd be like, Docker might be overkill for that, but here's where it gets really cool. So if you hit, my company site is codewithdan.com. Nobody can spell my name right, so my wife said, why don't you go simple, because everyone know how to pronounce my name? Yeah, I heard Wahlin, nope. Wahlin, nope. It's Wahlin. It's Wahlin, like a wall leaning. That's the first time I've done that. I hope everybody on YouTube will remember this, please. But anyway, I gave up. Only place that says it right is Sweden and Norway. They say it right, but it's Wahlin. So we have any Norwegians or Swedes in here? Oh yeah, all right. You guys know how to pronounce. But anyway, let's jump on in here. So this is something that about 2 years ago, I had this problem where I wanted to get a WordPress blog going locally with Nginx as the front end. That's a reverse proxy if you haven't heard of it. Very fast for especially static content and things like that, and it can do some of your routing to your backend, Node, Java, ASP.NET Core, stuff like that. And I had MariaDB, which is basically the MySQL variant. And getting that going was just hard locally to make it exactly like my production version. And it got to the point where I would try something locally, I'd do a WordPress update or whatever, and then I'd try it remotely using the built-in features, and something would break. And I'm like, what the heck, it worked here. What is the problem? So I had heard about this thing called Docker, which is now about 4 years old, and said, this looks interesting, but I'm not a DevOps guy. And if you are a DevOps guy, no offense, but I've always viewed that as either the clickety-click people, or the command line, and you're awesome at that, right? And I was really neither of those, but let's suffice to say I've kind of got a lot better at that. So I dove in, and at first glance I'm like, nah, this is for my DevOps folks, because I have some really close friends that they are in the DevOps world, or the IT admin, whatever you want to call it. So as I dove in, I quickly said, this is pretty cool. This is really neat. Now, as we go through it, I have a bunch of slides for you. This link right here, I'm not going to have time to go through all the slides. In fact, we're going to do a real quick run through of what Docker is to start, now that we've kind of addressed some of the problems. But here's the link you can get to for the slides. So I'll leave that up for just a moment. So a little more history on this story then. So I started playing with Docker, and I'm trying to get WordPress and Nginx, and I had Redis for another project, and MongoDB and PostgreSQL, and you get the idea. You start working with more and more tech depending on the customer we were working with. And what ended up happening was, once I got the hang of these Docker images and containers, which we're going to talk about today, I went, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Like I said, if you hit codewithdan.com or blog.codewithdan, there's probably about 8 Docker containers running. It's up in Azure, up in the cloud. And that's actually how those sites are actually running. It's all Docker behind the scenes. And it's awesome because right here on this laptop, I'm not going to run the blog one, but I could get my entire production version of my blog with, there's 3 containers for that one, going exactly like it'll be on my Linux servers, right here on my laptop, and it'll be exact. so that when I make a change, I have the confidence that when I deploy it, it's just going to work just like I thought. All right, so let's talk about the challenge then of this. So the challenge is, maybe you're working on a project that does use these different techs. We have Nginx as a front-end reverse proxy. We have multiple maybe microservices, given that we're Angular developers. You might be calling a Java or .NET or a Node or PHP or something like that. And then they might call different databases. Could be Mongo, Postgres, SQL Server, Oracle, whatever. Then you might also have some caching, all right? And, if you just got hired at the company, you might as well plan on like 2 days of downtime just to get everything configured right, And some of you have done this before. It's pretty easy to install things, but it's hard to get the security right exactly like your staging or your production environment. So you're gonna see that with Docker, it's gonna make it much easier. I have a kind of a mini microservice demo I'm gonna run for you at the end here, where I do have these things. I have Nginx, that's our front end, that's where Angular is gonna be hosted. One of the things we see in a lot of the demos here this week is ng-serve. And that's great for development, but you're not gonna ng-serve in production. So where do you put your code? Well, you could throw it on Apache, IIS, Nginx, HA proxy, there's all these different options, but we're actually gonna do that for real here in just a minute. And then Angular then, if it was in the Nginx host container, might call into Java or .NET or Node or PHP or whatever. Now I have it where it's gonna call into Node.js, which uses Mongo. And I have another little microservice, we'll call it, which is ASP.NET Core, calling Postgres SQL. So much more of what I would call a real world scenario for large companies where different teams are responsible for setting up these microservices. All right, so let's talk about how Docker can help with this. So first off, kind of what is Docker? Well, it is all about simplifying, number one, getting an environment going on your box, first off, and that's probably why most of you would be interested. But if you are also in charge of some of your backend, and how many do server-side code as well as Angular in here? Oh, almost everybody. Well, the challenge is there to get that server configured exactly the same between your dev box or your dev servers or whatever and staging in production. So it'll help with this. We're gonna be talking about containers, and containers, if you look at the Docker whale image there, you can think of it just like that. It literally back in the old days, go back to like 1600s when they used to ship stuff across the ocean, there was no standardization. So from what I've read, didn't get to see it, but from what I read, it was very time consuming to get stuff on and off a ship because you had different sizes and it was just hard. Well, then they standardized, on these shipping containers, which everybody's seen at the docks and things. That's kind of how Docker is. They provide a very consistent way to not only get an environment running on your Mac or Windows or Linux machine, but also to move that forward to staging, production, and whatever else you have. It can even be used for various testing scenarios. Maybe you have to run all kinds of tests, then you want to kill it all, and then reopen it, and then drop it again, and so on and so forth. Now, what's nice about it, it does run natively on Linux. Now, on Mac, I'm on a Mac right here, obviously, and I can run it as well, although we'll talk about how that works. And then on Windows, if you have Windows 10 or higher, you need professional or higher. You can run what I'm going to show you in just a bit here. It's called the Community Edition of Docker. It's the free one. Now, if you're on Windows 7 at work, which I know a lot of you probably are at work because they just haven't upgraded, you can still do it, but it's called Docker Toolbox. And that uses VirtualBox under the covers. But the bottom line is, by default, it's going to run on Linux. But if you are a Windows Server company, Windows Server 2016 now natively supports this same type of technology. Now, I'm going to be running Linux containers today, but you could do whatever you wanted. All right, so that's kind of what I was saying there. If you're on Windows 10 Pro or higher, you'll be able to run the same thing I'm going to do. If you're on Windows 7, you can do it. It's just a slightly different way that you do it. All right, let's talk about these things then called images and containers. So the way it works is you're going to create something called a Docker image, or you're going to pull one from something called Docker Hub. And you go to hub.docker.com, and you get to Docker Hub. And they have everything you can think of is up there. If you want to get Jenkins going, as long as you know how to configure it, so that could take a while, but you could get Jenkins up on your machine literally as fast as you can pull down the image. And we'll talk about, by the way, these are not VMs. I don't mean image like VM. This is a different concept. Now what we're going to do with that is we're going to create a Docker container then. This is actually the runtime version of the image. So for those that have the class background, which if you've done TypeScript or any other language that uses classes, really it's like the Docker image is almost like the blueprint, the class, and the container is almost like you newed up the class. Now you're going to use it for something, and that's how you can kind of think of the difference between these. Now, an image is just a read-only template. What it has is a layered file system of all the stuff. Nginx, for instance, is going to have all the Nginx stuff that sits on top of whatever operating system. Now, like I said, I'm going to be using Linux, but you could do Windows Server 2016 if you wanted, which is actually super cool. Now, the container is actually then at runtime. Like if you hit my website, you're hitting containers live. And that is kind of like the runtime version of your image. So it kind of looks like this. An image is going to have these file layers. These are just read-only. All right, so they're actually way long. It gives each layer gets a unique ID. What's cool about this is if you pull, let's say, Nginx for reverse proxy, and it has that first layer that what is that, 9.1 or something like that, and that exact ID is used by another image, then when you pull that image, it won't re-pull that layer. It's going to go, oh, you already have this. And so every little layer, I think of a cake, think of a chocolate cake with multiple layers. Each layer is an instruction on files, something that should happen with files. Could be your source code. In this case, like Nginx or Node.js, it's going to have the node code, of course. Could be your NPM modules. Could be your JavaScript files. So you make an image, and then at runtime, you make these containers, and that adds a real thin, readable, writable layer, they call it. Now, not something to focus on. Now, where does it run? As mentioned, it runs on Linux or Windows. I'm going to show you the Linux side of that today. But it is not a virtual machine. This is what's so really cool about it. So on the left side here, this is the kind of traditional way that I think most of us that work with VMs have done it. You'll have your host operating system. Linux is pretty popular in this world, but Windows Server can do it as well. Or maybe something else you have. Then on top of that, we usually have our guest OSs, so that's literally a new copy of the overall OS, right? And we know how many work with VMs that work much? All right, they're pretty big, right? I mean, they're not one of these like, oh yeah, it's only 10 meg. It's maybe 10 gig, depends on what it is, of course. Now, what the difference here with Docker is you still have your host, and this would be Linux by default, or Windows 2016 server. But now, on top of that, imagine some layers that add the missing pieces onto the host that you could kind of think of it as at runtime, almost like it merges them together. Now, what's cool, though, is each container you run, which would be like app 1 and app 2 here, they could be isolated. Now, it depends on how you do it, because there are some tricks to this, but you can literally think of it. I could run like node, heaven forbid, 0.1.2 or whatever it was, the really old one, in one container. And I could have node 6.10. Whatever the LTS is right now. And I could have node 7. What are we up to, 5 or 4, something like that right now. All of those on the same exact box, or Java, or .NET, or you name it. And each one is in its own isolated container. Now think about how cool that is. Anybody had this scenario? Your boss comes in and you're having a meeting and you say, we'd like to move to this version of the framework. It's super cool, has all these awesome features. And then your boss then, or whoever says, can't do it. This app on this server, if we update it, it's going to break. Nobody's had this, right? And so now you have this server that kind of has to stick around with a VM, hopefully. And eventually you'll migrate it, but for now you're kind of stuck. So what do? You spawn up another VM for that, which works. But with this, you could still have just one VM with multiple containers running, which you're going to see in a moment. So let me show you just a quick example of this real fast here. So I mentioned that there's this hub site. It's called hub.docker.com, and you'll notice up in here I have a search area. And we're going to do Nginx here in just a moment, so let me go search for that. Okay, so here's an Nginx. It's the official image. from the group that runs that actually. So let me drill in there. And then there's even different versions of it. I'm a big fan of Alpine Linux because it's teeny when I can use it. But you could use, a lot of them will have, an Ubuntu or Debian or whatever it is. They'll have different flavors of Linux, for instance. And then, of course, on Windows, you can do the same with the Windows image. So what I can do is I can actually, over here to the right, they have this command you can run. Now, before we run it, let's go back to, let's go to a different tab here. We're going to go to docker.com. And while this is loading, let me show you up here in the top of my kind of toolbar here area, my menu. This is called Docker Community Edition, Docker CE. You'll notice there is an Enterprise Edition as well. This one is free, that one is not. But this will let you get to all kinds of stuff. You can create a Docker ID. In fact, I'm not even signed in right now for some reason, but it won't affect this. I could stop it, but this little whale, you'll see Docker's running. And what this is doing under the covers is running a very lightweight kind of hypervisor, and it's running an Alpine Linux VM under the covers. So every demo I'm going to run, I'm actually running Linux technically, even though I'm on my Mac. And if I was on Windows 10 or Server 2016 or higher, I could actually run a Windows version of the image. Now, let me, now that I've kind of shown you, you can go to get Docker to get it for Mac or Windows. If you have Linux, you can just run it natively because it's built into a Linux container option. So let me go back to the command line here. In fact, I'm going to start a new one up. And let me zoom that up just a bit. Okay, we'll zoom more if we need to. And what I'm going to do is if I do npm, wrong one, Docker, whatever it is, pull Nginx, and I'm not going to be able to type it. Who wants to come up and type for me? All right. Now, I've already done this, so I'm not going to run it. In fact, it should be quick, but I'm not going to trust the network here. This will actually pull down the image for Nginx, and now I'm going to show you how we can run this very quickly. And you might be going, I don't even know what Nginx is. You know what? Neither did I until about a year and a half ago. I had never used it until I started diving into Docker, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I can get stuff I don't even know how to use going, So, which is kind of scary, of course, but let's hope your DevOps people do know how to use it. So, let me go ahead in here, and now I'm going to show you some commands. Don't feel like you need to memorize these. I have some slides in the slide deck. But I could say, hey, Docker, I would like to see all the images on my machine. All right, now you'll notice I have some node. If we kind of zoom in here, I have a node regular, and then I have node Alpine, which is a very small version. I have Nginx regular, that's the latest there in the middle, and I have Nginx Alpine. And then I have ASP.NET Core, I have WordPress, MariaDB, MongoDB. These are all images. Now, this is what's so cool, though. If I didn't want one of these, I could say, Docker, remove image, MariaDB, and then actually, I'll have to give an ID here. The image for MariaDB would be 7E. If you kind of look over here in this image ID, you don't have to type the whole thing. You can only just type just enough to do it. Now, I'm not going to delete it because I might need this like tonight, and hotel Wi-Fi, not always good, but this would actually remove that image, and there was like no trace now that I ever had that. There's no install. I don't run an install package and then clean it up and uninstall when I'm done, or how many have had it where new version of Mongo comes out or Postgres or whatever you use, and okay, now I got to run through that update process, and you could use Vagrant or stuff like that, but with this, you'll see it's very simple. Okay, so that's the Docker images. Now, what I can do then is, let's go back. So if we go to Docker images here, so I have this Nginx Alpine. Now, what you do is the left one is the name of the image, and then the tag, you put a colon. So I'd say Nginx Alpine. So let's get Nginx going right here. So let's pretend I did a Docker pull, Nginx Alpine, enter. I'm not going to trust the network on that one because it shouldn't do anything, but I don't want to screw anything up because I really need that later in the demo. So let me go ahead and let's try to run it. And the next command I can do is I can say, hey, Docker, I would like to run. I'm going to run it in what's called daemon mode. That allows your console to still be active. And I'm going to run it on port 8080. And then the container is going to be on port 80, though. Nginx by default uses port 80 for that. And then I could come in and say, what image do I want to run on port 8080 that forwards to port 80 in the container? Well, I want Nginx Alpine. Okay, so what we've done here is said, hey, Docker, let's run this in what's called daemon mode. You'll see what that does in just a sec. On a port, the external port I'm going to hit in the browser is 8080, but it's going to forward to an internal port, okay, which is 80. Now, why am I showing Nginx? Well, because as I said, yesterday, today, a lot of the talks you're going to see, they do ng-serve, and that's great for development. But at some point, you got to get that on a real server, right? The little light server and things is great for dev, but maybe not for production. Well, Nginx and many other options, again, it could be Apache if you want it. It doesn't really matter. It's up to you. You could do it. So let's go ahead and hit this. Now, notice that my console came back. That's because it's running in the background now in daemon mode. Let me go ahead and try to go to the browser now. And we'll go to 8080. And there we go. I now have Nginx up and running, and I've yet to do anything. Now, it's not going to impress friends and family, but that's pretty cool. Now, if I wanted, I could say Docker. Well, let's go do that, in fact. Say, hey, Docker, show me, this ps-a will show me all the running containers. And you'll notice it's running 35 seconds ago, approximately, it came up. And now what I'm going to do is stop it. So I'm going to say, hey, Docker, stop, and then you give it the ID. It's on the left. It's C2 something. That just stopped it. Then I'm going to say, hey, Docker, let's just remove it. I'm done with that container. Gone. Okay, now if I do Docker ps-a, no containers are running right now. So I still have images. Again, if we go back to Docker images, I didn't delete that. There's my Nginx. But you'll notice that my container's gone. So now I can't run anything, but I could restart up the image if I wanted. Now, that's cool, but how does that help you with Angular? Well, let me show you how we can do that. So let's say that, let me CD into my desktop, and I think I have a demos, yeah. So let's do the good old what's it been out, like a week officially or something, but in the official release. But let's go ahead and do ng, and what do we want to do here? John did it yesterday. We want to new up a project, right? Now this is anybody else new to the CLI in here? Be honest, we kind of all are. This is where the, yeah, we could do that, or --h, help, I think will do it. This is where the little help will be very helpful. So John showed this yesterday. Let me go up to the top here. You'll notice that we have all the different options for building, which I'm going to do in a moment. We have auto-completion, and it goes on and on and on. So if you're new to this and you didn't have time yet to play with it, I was actually not a huge fan of the CLI until really, really recently. John showed the ng-eject right there. That's when I went, oh, cool, because now I can have complete control over the Webpack file and stuff, things like that. So, we can generate new things, we can get things, we can lint, we can new, which I'm going to do here. But anyway, so where most demos go here, though, is they do this. They do ng, new, let's call it my project. I don't think that's taken. And we could say --, and what is it? Routes or routing? Router. Yeah, there we go. So let's do that. And this is going to go ahead, and I don't even need the router, but I just wanted to show it. Let's go ahead and spec that out. Now, I'm hoping the network's going to cooperate here. Otherwise, we'll have to move on. But it should, hopefully, as I'm wired in, get our NPM. So while this is running, what I'm going to do is, once we get this, I'm going to run a ng-build. That's going to generate a dist folder. And then I'm going to actually run Angular, the demo that it generates, in Nginx with, I don't know, take me about 30 seconds or something like that. And then you can have a real server. And again, this could be Apache. It could be whatever your server is to serve up your static content. I like Nginx. Some people like HA proxy. Some people like Apache, IIS, whatever it may be. So let's let this run here, and we'll come back. I'll tell you what, while this is running, since, there we go, not bad. So what I'm going to do now is an ng, let me clear this so you guys can see. Let's do ng build. You have to be, I have to be in it, yes, thank you. So let's go in it. So notice I have a my project. So let's go ahead and cd into my project. Now we'll run ng build. And then you have your different -- prod and all that. I'm not going to do AOT quite yet, but we'll let Webpack and all that do its thing. And this will generate our bundles. And then what we're going to try to do, hopefully, is get this up and running in Nginx with Docker containers. So let's go ahead now and cd into the dist, which is where it would have put the code. Let's make sure. Okay, looks good. And now what I'm going to do is, let's see if I can remember the path here. If not, I have it. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to say on the external, I want to call port 8080. But internally in the container, it's going to call 80. But I'm going to create something called a volume. Now, I put a few slides about volumes. What this does is, by default, when you kill a container, everything goes. Any logs, any code, anything that was in that container, bye-bye. It's gone. That obviously would not work so well with databases. You take down the container and boom, there's all your data. Hopefully you have backups. So what I can do is create what's called a volume. And I can say, hey, container, I want you to point to this folder on the host. Now, I want it to point to my dist folder, and that's called the working directory. So I'm going to use this little $pwd, and it's just a shortcut for working directory. And then I'm going to go to its USR, share, Nginx, HTML, and if that's wrong, I'll go look it up, but I think that's right. And then what is it I want to run? Well, again, I want to run Nginx, Alpine in this case. That's the kind of smaller version of the image. All right, so again, Docker, please go run in daemon mode on port 8080 for us. This is where the browser's going to hit it. Go run this Nginx Alpine, but create kind of like a link between the container and this dist folder. So that when Nginx sees this USR share Nginx HTML, well, that's where your code goes, by default anyway. You can change it. I want it to point back to my local machine so that if I make any changes there, it just automatically picks it up in the container. So you can kind of think of it like just as an alias to some folder that's on your local host, which is my Mac right now. Okay, so Linux pointing back to the Mac. Now, we'll see if I got that right. USR share, I think that's right. Okay, so let's go see though. I'm going to say Docker ps-a will list it. It looks like it's been up for 5 seconds. Okay, that's a good start. It's better than down. So let's go back to the browser now. And we'll hopefully now see the CLI, little app that it generates. So let's go to localhost. And what did I do? 8080, I believe. And now that's cached, hopefully. All right, there we go. So now I am running my Angular CLI app, which is very sophisticated. If you could sell this for 99 cents on the App Store to 1 million people, you're rich. But I'm now running that. Now, yes, that's very basic, but you can see how easy, with just that one command, I'm now able to get Angular going on a real server that's capable of handling millions of users if I wanted. Now, I have a much more robust one I'm going to show you here in just a little bit. But pretty cool, right? Not bad. I mean, yeah, I won't lie to you. I've spent a few years now doing the commands, so I told you I didn't really come from the either clickety-click or the command line world. I was a little more of the visual back in the day. And so, now, of course, I love all command line stuff, but it takes a little practice is all. All right, so now that we've seen that, let's go ahead. In fact, how do we take it down, the container? Anyone remember? Stop, yeah. So if I look on the left, you'll see on the far left there are 3A, what is it, 3A6. Now you can name your containers, by the way. There's a -- name you can do. I didn't do that, or you can use theirs, gifted Aryabhata. I don't know. I did a course for Pluralsight, and they did a random one of these that I left in. Didn't make it through the review process. It's something I'm not allowed to say on stage. We have code of conduct, but I thought it was funny, so I left it in. They're like, no, you can't put that in. So I had to re-record that clip. But anyway, so let me go into here and just again, do it again. Docker ps-a, repetition's good here. Okay, 3A, so Docker, I would like to stop 3A. And if you have a bunch of them and maybe 2 of them start with 3A, then you go one more, 3A6, I do as few as I can, and then we'll say Docker remove 3A, and now if we do Docker PSA, you'll see it's gone. Okay, I still have my image, don't have my running container. It's as if it never existed. And again, if I wanted to remove that image, if I was done with it, which I'm not, then I would just put the image ID right here, and it's gone. It's as if it never existed, and it instantly deletes it. It's not like this big uninstall process and something like that. It's very, very cool. All right, so let's do a little bit more here. How are we doing on time? Okay, we're doing good, actually. Now, can you imagine if you had a node container, Nginx, Postgres, Mongo, PHP, maybe you have this anyone use microservices at work yet? Okay, a few of you. If you've ever heard of the SOA concept, service-oriented architecture, microservices is kind of like the next evolution of that. That's an extreme summation, but it's kind of what it is. It's a way where, this team, you guys over here, you're all on that's a big team, but hey, you're all on one team. Maybe you're doing Node, but this team over here, you're a different part of the company or maybe contractors or something, and maybe you're doing like PHP. All right, well, as Angular, I don't really care. I just need the URLs. But how are you going to manage this? Can you imagine Docker run yours, Docker run yours, Docker run the database, Docker run this, Docker run that? I mean, you'd be there all day. That would get old. And while I'm okay with the command line, I'm not that okay with the command. We're not that good of friends. So I'm going to show you a little extra bonus thing we can do here in just a moment. So let me get back to the slides real quick, and then we'll jump into something called Docker Compose, which is like phenomenal. Those that are going, nope, I don't like this, too much command line already, you'll probably like what I'll show you in a little bit, because there's only a couple commands. Now, the benefits then of this. So, you get back to work and you're like, yeah, Dan said this is kind of cool. And then they'll probably go, oh, Dan? No. If John said it, listen, but if Dan said it, nah. That's what my wife does. Yeah. We actually, our families are real good friends. So they hang out, and who knows what they say about us. But anyway, the benefits here are many. Having done this now for 2 years in production, and I know several companies that we've worked with that are using this in production. Number one, if anybody does have contractors and it's very difficult to get them to set things up in a way that's consistent with your staging or test environment, this can be cool for that. We'll talk about that in a moment. Maybe you have some UI folks who they're tweaking the CSS and doing the images and all that stuff that changes our Battleship Gray to readable. They probably aren't going to know how to get a server up, potentially. Their skills are much better than my skills. They can do things like Photoshop and all that. Okay, so we'll talk about that. App conflicts. Again, what happens when a new version of a framework comes out? Well, for a lot of you, that probably means either a new VM or a new server. If you have existing apps on an older version, because you don't want those conflicts going, potentially. Now, there's ways around that too, but environment consistency, this is huge. We were on a project for, I'll just say it was a large credit card company. And when we got our environment going, well, we used their dev environment. Moved it to the stage environment, everything broke. And it turned out they had some extra firewalls and some extra stuff in place that we didn't know about. Okay, well, this can help with that. Getting it to production, much easier. AWS, Azure, you name it, App Harbor, all those different things out there will allow you to do containers now. So I go to something called, I'm not going to have time to show it today, but I go to something called cloud.docker.com. And literally, when I have a container update, I can link it either A, to a hook in my, I use Bitbucket for my private, but GitHub for all my public, most of it anyway. And I can link it, and I can even have a hook that when my source code changes, it rebuilds the image. And then I could set it up, I don't have this today, but where it even redeploys the container. That one I like to kind of control a little bit more right now. But you can even hook all that, which is very cool. So if you are in this mode where you have extreme mix, you have server-side folks, you have UI folks, you have people that just, managers that have no clue, whatever, then this will help you get these servers, whether it's databases, web servers, reverse proxies, Redis for caching maybe, all going in a consistent way. And I have a kind of a much bigger demo I'm going to run here to wrap up once we get to it. App conflicts I've already talked about. Let me go back. So again, you have like version 1, version 2, version 3. Well, that can be a little bit problematic sometimes depending on how your framework works and updates and things. With this, we can help avoid that. And then moving between the environments, our staging, our production, things like that could be much better. So in the end, it does this. It ships software faster. Now, let's get to where it gets really cool. So kind of the steps, again, that I've already gone through is you do need to install Docker Community Edition. And you do have to have, again, Windows 10 Pro or a Mac. Now, if you're running Linux, there's actually some commands you can run and just get it natively on Linux. So that's its kind of default home. You may create a custom Docker file. Now, a Docker file is how you make your custom images. And I'll show you some of that coming up here in just a moment before we run the big demo. And then you're going to run these commands. You're going to run the Docker run, Docker remove, Docker images, Docker PSA, all that type of stuff to get this going. Now, if you're on a Mac, what it does under the covers is uses HyperKit with a little Alpine Linux VM to host your Linux. If you're on Windows, it's going to use Hyper-V. That's why you need Windows 10 Pro or higher. But again, you can use Docker Toolbox if you're on Windows 7, and it works. That's how I started. So they have these things called Docker files. I'm going to show you a really simple example here of some of the images I have for my microservices that Angular calls. Much more real-life example coming up here. And this contains all the instructions, as it says there, for how do I build the layers of the cake. What files are going to be in this image? Might be my source code, might be images, who knows? All right, so you're going to have these instructions, and then when you do a Docker build, which I'm not going to do because mine are already built, it will convert those Docker files into an actual image. So it kind of works like this. So you're going to write a Docker file for maybe Nginx. Maybe in there you copy in your Angular. That's what I'm doing. And then you're going to run it through this Docker build process, and now you have a custom image. So the ones up on Docker Hub, some of those are custom. Some of those are from the actual component vendors out there, or the server vendors, like Nginx, or some of the open source ones like Postgres and things. So here's a quick example. Let me just write this out. This is actually an ASP.NET Core example. But I could do Node. In fact, the demo I have has Node and ASP.NET Core and a bunch of other stuff. So you say from, and you give it your base image. Now this is kind of like I want to inherit from this cake, and I want to add my own layers on top of that cake. That's what this is doing. Of course, you always got to put the maintainer so you know who to blame. You have the copy. I'm going to copy from the local folder, that's the dot, into this var www app. That would be where it's going to go in the container when it runs. I'm going to use that folder as my startup directory, my working directory. And then in this case, I'm doing some commands specific to something called ASP.NET Core. Now, if it was Node, which I also have in this demo, that's where you can run PM2 or NodeMon or whatever you like to use to start it up, or maybe just call Node server.js or whatever you call it. So then you do this. You just kind of write all these out real quick. So you say, hey, Docker, I want to build an image. I would like to tag it as. Now, the thing on the left, you can have your own repositories up in Docker Hub, or for most companies, they'll have a local repository. So this would be something that your IT admin would set up. You as a developer then, if you have rights, would be able to make your own images. Now, other people on the team would be able to pull that image down and use it on their box, which is very cool, you'll see in a moment. Then you can give it the image name. In this case, I called it .NET, and then I gave it a version as well in this particular example. And then dot means what's the context? Well, use the current folder. That's where the Docker file is, in the current folder. Then I can do what you already saw. Then I can say, hey, I'd like to run it in daemon mode. I'd like to name it .NET. I would like to do that port, internal, external. Well, it's actually, external is the one on the left, internal is the one on the right, and then there's the name of my image I just made in the last slide. Okay, now here's the problem though. This is great if you do the demo I did, but what happens when your app has 10 containers? Can you imagine you have to run, it can get much longer than this. And you're like, nah, I don't think so. Okay, so the good news is, let me skip forward here. They have an orchestration tool built into Docker, which is just phenomenal, especially for dev, called Docker Compose. And those in here, I know one gentleman in the front row here. Where are you? Yeah, you're probably using this, right? Okay, or that, yep. There's a couple options for orchestration. But here's the general idea. I have all these images that I want to convert to a real life production-like environment exactly on my machine though. You know, I do not want to run Docker run, Docker run, Docker run. 10 minutes later, you finally got them all up, but you realize you screwed up one of them. Now you got to take it down, and you know it'd be painful. That's actually what we used to do, by the way, in the old days. And I'm here to tell you, you're catching it at the right time, because I spent way more of the time than I should have back then. So let's say that we have this scenario I started the talk with. We have maybe Nginx or Apache or whatever you want to have as your front-end server that serves up your static content. We then have some back-end API servers. So let's say Angular, in this case, is in Nginx, like the demo I ran. It's going to call into these different APIs. We'll call these microservices. And then they would have, typically each microservice has its own database, own cache. It's kind of self-responsible. Well, to get all that going is actually challenging. So fortunately, we have a very simple way to do it. You end up creating a file called a YAML file. And this YAML file is basically just a file that says, hey, I have Nginx, here's where the image is. I have Redis, here's where the image is. I have. And then what it'll do is, with one command, you can bring up everything on your dev box, which I'm going to attempt here in just a moment while I pull the rabbit out of the hat. We'll try to do those both at the same time. So it kind of works like this. Docker Compose is a YAML file, and this is one of those things, you just go find a good one and kind of copy and paste and tweak. If there's one thing I'm good at, I'm really good at copy paste, let me tell you. I think that's my -- skill in programming. That and Googling, right? But what this is going to do is orchestrate one or more images, convert the image into containers. And this is kind of what it looks like. Now, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but you'll notice, and there's even a new version. I'm not running it yet, but there's even a new one. But ASP is a service I have. Postgres is a service I have. And then you can even set up custom networks between your containers so that other containers can't talk to this one if they're on the same box, same VM, for instance. Now, you'll notice on the ASP one, there's a build process there. Context is dot, that means use the current folder. And the Docker file I'm going to use is called ASP Docker, node Docker in the example I'm going to have for you, Postgres, whatever it is. So it kind of works like this. Now, this is where it gets really cool. This is where a lot of you, especially if you're like, you know what, Dan, I'm not a command line person. I do not want to use the command line more than a few keystrokes. Then, as long as you have Docker CE installed, you can run Docker Compose build. That'll now go into this file right here and create your images. Now, this bottom one, Postgres, I don't have a Docker file. I'm just going to pull the image up from Docker Hub or your personal company hub if you have one. So in that case, it's pretty simple. So what this will do now is I say, hey, Docker Compose, notice not Docker, Docker Compose, build. Now that's going to read the YAML file and build up, it could be 50 images, who knows? One command will do that. Now you'd have the images on your machine. Now you run Docker Compose up. That now starts up all the containers. And when you do the YAML file, you can even say, hey, this container depends on this container. So you can kind of make sure they load in the proper order. There's actually still some challenges there, and then when you're done, you just live long and prosper. It's pretty nice. So let me show you an example of this in a much more kind of real life project. This is actually kind of based on, so I think I went to bed about 3:30 last night because I was just going to do the Nginx demo, and I went, no, I just can't do it. We got to do something big. So like an idiot, John texted me at like 2 or something. He's like, you're in bed, right? And I'm like, nope. Because he knew I was doing a demo. But hopefully you'll like it, because it's definitely more robust. The Angular app's not huge, but it's hitting multiple microservices, Node, ASP.NET Core, Postgres, MongoDB, and everything's Dockerized, if you will. So let me open up this file right here. It's called Docker Compose, and then we'll run it. So notice I have some services. I have Nginx. It has its own Docker file. I need to tweak things a little bit. It has a volume. Now this volume says I want to point to the local dist folder, like I ran earlier, but in the container, the USR share Nginx HTML, well, really that's just an alias for the dist folder. So the container is pointing now back to my local host. So I can make changes now in the dist folder, and the container, since it points to that, automatically gets those changes. Now that's not good for production, but in production what you would do is in the Docker file, you would copy in your code into the Docker image. Now anyone that pulls your image down, they have everything. They have Nginx, they have all your code, it's all configured, the security set up. For real life, I have SSL certificates, for instance, that I can pull in to my image. Now those you want to secure, of course. Now moving on down, there's the ports. I'm going to hit Nginx on port 80 or 443. I'm not using SSL here, but you could. All right, there's a node container. Has its own Docker file. There's a MongoDB container. There's an ASP.NET Core container. My goal was throw as many technologies as possible to simulate the typical enterprise, because nobody can seem to just do one thing. Does anybody else have that where like the question is what database you use? You're like, what database don't we use? You know, it's like ridiculous. You know, I've seen, no joke, and some of you probably have, I've still seen access driving websites. Has anyone seen this by chance? Scary, scary, scary stuff out there. Now, what you can do though from here is now that I have that Docker file, which it takes a little bit of practice to get right, I will admit. If I do Docker images again, I've already done the Docker build process. Now, I could run through it probably here pretty quick, but we got about 10 minutes at the most here. So, but I could run through that and I could do this. I could say Docker compose. Let me see if that's big enough for the back row. And I could say build. Now, because I've already built these, unless an image up on Docker Hub has changed, and which is why I'm not going to do it, because it could be that literally 10 minutes ago, Nginx updated, and it would have to pull the new layers down because I'm using the latest version, which by the way is dangerous. You normally want to use a specific version of an image because it's kind of like saying, I totally trust who wrote this JavaScript library, and I'm just always going to use the latest. They'll never break anything. Never. I had a problem with, did anybody hit the core.js issue a couple weeks ago by chance? Well, I had the, the hat. And there was a breaking change in the metadata for core.js for the typing. And it took down every single app I had. And I went, why did I do that? And luckily, it didn't make it to production. But in dev, it took everything down. So now, watch this. Now, this is the moment of truth. And I'm going to hope the network's cooperating here because it will have to hit the network. I'm going to say Docker compose up. Now, if you're a UI person, and your task is to make it look real, as in good, how do you do that? You don't, because you're like, I don't know Node, I don't know Postgres, I can't get all that set up. So you'd have to spend a couple days working with someone to get that set up probably. It'd be like me going, hey Dan, use Photoshop for me, or one of the other tools. I'd be like, I don't do that, not too much anyway. So if I do Docker compose up, this will take a moment to fire up, but notice it's creating all these containers, and now it's giving me some logging. Now I didn't do you can do a -D for daemon. I didn't do that, so it's going to tie up my console here. But this is actually going to pull, right? I didn't bake in the ASP.NET Core packages. It's kind of like NPM packages. So it's going to have to pull these in. Now it's seeding the database with some fake data. Very important for an app for production. And then let's try it. So now I have Nginx with Angular. It's hitting Node, which hits Mongo. It's hitting Postgres, which hits, hitting ASP.NET Core, which hits Postgres. And then in the real life app, I would throw in Redis. I have some Redis caches. So let's see what happens here. So let's go to just localhost. Remember, it was just 80 was the port. All right, awesome. It looks like it worked. Now, I literally just got Angular in Nginx hitting these microservices, hitting a real database. Now, to be real honest, this is all coming, the names here are all coming from the Node microservice and Mongo. But I wanted to throw another one in, which is ASP.NET Core. So it's very sophisticated. That's where the states are coming from. Awesome. I had to break it out somehow, So anyway, this has full CRUD operation support. It's very easy. Literally, you guys could probably get this up and running exactly like this. In fact, I'll give you there's a link to this. Is up on GitHub right now. I just put it up last night at probably 3:30 or maybe 3:10. And this will actually does cores and all that fun stuff because I had to for microservices, does the updates, has some basic filtering, paging, stuff like that. I won't say it's perfect because some of this was written very late last night. But this is a full-on Angular app in Nginx, hitting real databases, real servers, real microservices with Docker. And now that I have these images, if I were to deploy these images up to a private repo or just make them public in Docker Hub, then you can run this too by doing the Docker Compose build. I could deploy this to AWS and Azure in probably, if you gave me maybe 10, 15 minutes. Now, I'm not going to prove that, but I'm pretty confident that I could. In my case, I'd use Docker Cloud because that's what I'm comfortable with, but there's even other options. Docker Cloud will let you push these images and get the containers running in AWS and many other things like Azure and stuff. All right, so I think that's cool because now, if we go back to the command line, I have databases, web servers, proxy servers, all kinds of fun stuff running, and then when I'm done, I just do this. And let me clear this. Docker Compose down. So you have up and down. Now what that's going to do is stop all the containers, basically kill my app, and it's also going to remove all of my containers. Now you could also do some other options, but give it a sec. Okay, let's do Docker ps-a, nothing. Docker images, there's my images. Okay, and now I can start it back up. So if you're someone who does not deal with this side, you're pure JavaScript, you don't do the server side at all. Literally all you have to do is Docker Compose build, Docker Compose up, and boom, you can now edit the live source code on your machine and see it in a real world context of exactly how it's going to be in staging or production. All right, so to wrap up here, let me show you, I have quite a few links and things for you. So, all right, actually, this is the one you need. So if you came in late and didn't get it, if you get this link right here, it's going to have a ton of GitHub repos that I have for you. I'm going to show you the first one in just a moment that I just ran, and that will have everything in there. So let me go ahead and leave that up, and then I have one more thing I'm going to wrap up with, and we'll time for lunch. I'm hungry. All right, I'll go back to that if you need it. So the project I just ran is Angular Docker Microservices, is this first one. And then I have a bunch of others, though, that also use Docker with Angular. So if you're interested, you can do that. And these are going to be a little more real life, not just the ng-serve, kind of demos. If you're interested, I also have some courses up on Pluralsight. Brand new one just came out, Angular and Node, and it also has some Docker. But let me go back to here. And with that, thank you very much. Appreciate it.